So when most people get told that they have to identify organisms that they've found and photographed, their first thoughts often go to a hard copy field guide, something along these lines. Now, this is all well and good if you're dealing with a group such as birds, which are very comprehensively treated in field guides like this, with every single species represented in a guide for Australia. But when you start delving into the invertebrate world, then things start to get a bit tricky because, of course, we have orders of magnitude more species now. Having said that, if you are dealing with groups such as butterflies or dragonflies and damselflies, then there certainly are really fantastic comprehensive field guides, at least from an Australian perspective. But once you start delving into groups such as longhorn beetles, then you get into murky waters. So you've got a several kilo book that is volume 1 of 3, and it's still not entirely comprehensive and doesn't have every single Australian species. So in cases like this, we have to go digital. And one of the most fantastic resources that you can use to help identify organisms that you observe is iNaturalist. Now, hopefully some of you have already heard of the platform, or even better, already use it. But for people that haven't, iNaturalist is an online biodiversity citizen science platform. What I mean by that is it's basically a big online scientific database / social media platform where any person from around the world, whether they're a professional scientist or just an enthusiastic amateur, can upload photographs or sound recordings of any organism, whether it's an animal, a plant, a fungus, you name it, that they've encountered, and then other users from all around the world will help identify them for you. And one of the best parts about iNaturalist is that once your observations have been identified, then the data get exported to external databases such as the Atlas of Living Australia and the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And from there, your data can actually then be used in real life research by professional scientists and researchers from all around the world. So you get the double bonus of both having your stuff identified for you and also being able to contribute to meaningful research. And already in the past 5 to 10 years, there are thousands of papers that have been published in scientific journals that use iNaturalist data, covering absolutely everything from recording species that had thought to become extinct and then were rediscovered, understanding how ecosystems recover from disasters such as bushfires, tracking phenology or morphology changes across space and time, and now even understanding how entire groups of organisms have changes in their populations across a decadal scale and across entire continents. So certainly we are in the age of big data, and iNaturalist is one of the most important contributors to that in the biodiversity sphere at the moment. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to do a quick run through and a very quick how-to for how you can make an iNaturalist account, upload your photos as observations, and then how you can either identify them yourself, which is always very fulfilling, or if you get stuck on some tricky ones, how you can get your observations identified by other users on iNaturalist. So 2 things I will just highlight. One is that there is both a mobile app as well as a desktop version of iNaturalist. Whilst the mobile app is fantastic if you're out in the field and you're on the go and you want to quickly upload photos while you're away from home, it has 1,000 times less functionality than the desktop version. So the desktop version is by far superior. And indeed, many of the features I'm going to go through in the next 15 to 20 minutes are exclusive to the desktop. So I highly recommend, if you're at home, please make sure you log onto the computer and use the desktop version of iNaturalist. The other thing is that if you are looking to download or looking to get into iNaturalist on the computer, all you have to do is Google iNaturalist. It then takes 2 minutes to sign up for an account. It's completely free, and away you go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and we will get right into this tutorial. So we'll move that there. Okay, so pretty much this is what your home screen is going to look like once you've created your account. And you've gone out, hopefully you've taken some photos of some really cool bugs and spiders and other invertebrates. And now you want to upload those photos. All you have to do is press this big green upload button here. You'll then get taken to this screen where you have two options. One is you can click the blue Choose Files button, and that will then take you to folders on your computer. Or alternatively, you can even just have that window open and then just select the photos you want and then physically drag them onto the screen. So now you'll notice that for each observation you upload, there are two really important pieces of metadata that you need to include. And these are the date that you took the photographs on and the location that you took the photograph at. Now you'll notice here that the date also includes the time. That's not important. So if you do have the time, that's fantastic. But if you don't have that information, that's completely fine. You'll notice straight away that depending on where you got your photo from, it may or may not have this metadata. So if you have downloaded your photos directly from your phone or your camera, then that metadata should be filled in. Certainly the date should be. The location may or may not be filled in, depending if you have your location services on or depending if your camera has geotagging on. But if you don't have the date and location filled out, they're both easy enough to do. So if your date is blank, all you have to do is click in that box. You'll see a little calendar pop up, and then you can page through all the different months and then select the appropriate date that you saw that observation. And then for the location, easy enough as well. You can click there and then you can either search. So this is essentially searching Google Maps. You can search for the location, or you can physically drag the map and navigate to the spot that you want. So I'm going to physically navigate, and I know that I saw this butterfly right at this little corner here. So you can click on the map and then you can expand the edges of this red circle, and that just indicates uncertainty around the location. So if you say, I can't remember the exact pinpoint where I found this butterfly, but I know it was somewhere roughly in this area, then that's perfect. Then you just click the blue Update Observations button, and now we've got the dates and we've got the location set. The other thing that you'll notice is that I've taken 3 photographs of this particular beetle. So certainly I highly recommend getting as many photos as you can from all kinds of different angles when you're dealing with invertebrates, because often multiple shots from multiple angles are needed to help you identify certain species. But very importantly, no matter how many photos you take of a particular individual, they should all be combined into one observation. So if you take 5 photos of the same beetle, they all need to be combined into one observation. But on the flip side of that coin, if you find 5 different insects and take photos of all of them, then they need to be uploaded as 5 separate observations, not all combined into one. So the basic ground rule is 1 encounter with 1 individual at one time equals 1 observation. So here in this case, I've taken just 1 photo of this butterfly, so I can just leave it as is. But I've taken 3 photos of this beetle, so I need to combine them. So the way I do that is first I pick which photo I want to appear first on my observation. Now, in this case, this is probably the most representative of the beetle. It shows it the clearest, so I'll pick this one as the first. And then very simple, all I have to do is pick up each of the other photos with my mouse and then physically drag it onto that first one. And you'll see that those 3 photos have now combined, and you can see it says 1 out of 3. And I can page through and see those photos. So now the last thing we need to do before uploading is upload something in the species name. Now, if you already know what the species is, if it's something very obvious, like let's say a honeybee or a monarch butterfly or something like that, then you can go ahead and type in the exact name. It's completely fine if you already know it. But if you don't know what the thing is, that is also completely fine. But very importantly, always put in some kind of guess. Even if that's something as basic as spider or insect, it is always better to put in some kind of guess rather than nothing, because many people will search for organisms specifically to try and identify. So a spider expert will usually specifically search for spiders to try and identify. So if you uploaded a photo of a spider, but you left the identification bar blank, then it won't appear in that expert search. So it's just a way of helping get your observations identified faster by other people. So here in this case, I can say, okay, I've got this butterfly. I have no idea what it is. That's completely fine. I just click in the bar, I type in butterflies, a drop-down menu appears, and I pick butterflies. So that's another very important aspect there. You can't just type in the name. You have to also then select it from the drop-down menu that appears. Same thing here. I can say, okay, I've got this beetle, but I've got no idea what species it is. So what we'll do is we'll type in beetles, drop-down appears, and we click beetles, and we're good to go. One final thing before I upload these is that you'll notice that whilst I was typing into that bar, a little drop-down appeared. So this is iNaturalist's computer vision. And what I mean by that is, for anyone who has ever used something like Google Lens, this pretty much works in the same way. So iNaturalist has this artificial intelligence program where every time you upload your photos, the computer vision predicts or guesses which species it thinks it is. Now, for things that are very obvious and charismatic and easily recognized, so to use the same examples, things like honeybees or monarch butterflies, then the computer vision does really well, and it's really great at guessing what your photo is. But then when you start dealing with some more obscure insects, then it doesn't perform as well. And that makes sense, right? Because the computer vision gets better the more and more photos that it gets to train on. So if you've got something like a honeybee, there are tens of thousands of observations of that species that have been uploaded to iNaturalist. So the computer vision has a really great and a very comprehensive training set of photos that it used to get better and better at recognizing that species. But if you've got obscure beetles and bugs and other kinds of invertebrates, some of them may either have 0 photos or 5 photos or only 10 photos that have ever been uploaded to the platform. So in those cases, that's not enough photos for the computer vision to be trained, so it can't recognize those species. So what it will do instead is it will suggest other species that are incorrect but look very morphologically similar. So if I was to wipe out that beetles there, if you click in the species bar name here, you'll see that a drop-down appears, and these are the top options in terms of which species it's guessing. So a really good way before you pick any of these options is to actually just double check the distribution of that species. What I mean by that, so you might say, okay, one of the top options it's suggesting is this 6-spotted neolema, and that looks pretty close. But before you select that, a good idea is to click View here. Well, what that will do is it will open a new page for that species. You can go down, you can have a look at the map, and straight away you can see, okay, every single observation of this species so far in iNaturalist is pretty much just in the United States, with a few throughout Central America and South America. So, that doesn't make it impossible that it could turn up in Australia, but it makes it pretty unlikely. So you can probably strike that one off as an option. Whereas if we go back and we pick an option, say, we can pick this genus because it says it's pretty sure it's in the genus Aulicophora. We can click the View button and we'll have a look at the map for this one. And we can now see, okay, there are quite a few observations in Australia, others throughout Southeast Asia as well, but certainly many observations that are in Australia. We say, okay, I'm still not 100% sure that it's that, but certainly this seems quite feasible. So that would then probably be a safe option to pick as your guess. But for now, we'll just put in beetles. So once you put in your guesses, you've got your dates, you've got your locations. All you have to do is hit that Submit to Observations button, and away you go. And you've now added your observations to iNaturalist. So now comes the fun part, which is trying to figure out which species you've actually seen. So as I said, there are 2 ways of doing that. So the first one I'll go into is being able to identify these observations all on your own. So I'm going to open these up in 2 new tabs. So we can look at both of these at once. And I'm just going to add in this little message so that we don't get any overly keen people identifying them before I can go through the example. Okay, so we'll start with our butterfly. So we say, okay, we've got what seems like a very striking and distinct butterfly. Surely we should be able to identify that. So the first step that you need to do is go up to the top and click this Explore button. Then in the location bar here, we'll type in New South Wales because obviously we took this photograph in New South Wales. And then we're going to type in butterflies and we'll pick butterflies. So now you'll see that 11,401 observations of butterflies in New South Wales have been uploaded to iNaturalist so far. And these cover 178 different species, and these have been contributed by more than 1,500 people. So what we'll do is we'll go to our species tab, and we now see these really nice thumbnails for all 178 butterfly species that have been observed in New South Wales on the platform thus far. So we'll go back to our observation. We'll see, okay, it's got black background to the wings, quite distinct blue markings here with a little bit of red as well. So what we'll do is we can start scrolling down and we can see if we can find a match. And now straight away, we see blue triangle butterfly, so Graphium corydon, seems like a pretty darn good match. But keeping in mind that there are a lot of insects across a lot of groups that look very, very similar to each other. So just to be safe, we're going to get the genus Graphium, and we're going to check that to see if there are any very similar lookalikes. So we'll type in Graphium, we'll pick the option. We'll see that there are actually 3 species that have been observed in New South Wales. Straight away, we can eliminate the Macleay's swallowtail because that has obviously very different patterning and coloration. But we do see that there is this species, the pale triangle, which is pretty similar to the blue triangle butterfly. But if we go back, we double check, and we have a look again, you'll see there's this very distinct row of pale blue spots all the way along the edge of the underwing of the pale triangle. When we go back to ours, we can see it clearly lacks those spots on the upper underwing. And if we go back to our blue triangle, we see it matches pretty much perfectly. So here we can be fairly confident of adding our ID of blue triangle butterfly. And you can write in the common name if one exists or the scientific name, both are perfectly fine. So they're pretty satisfying. We have now identified our butterfly successfully. So now we can move on to the beetle. But this is where things get a little bit tricky. Because if you look at the entirety of Australia, there are only about 438 butterfly species from memory. But if we look up beetles now, and keeping in mind this is only beetles that have been seen in New South Wales and only includes one on iNaturalist, you'll see that there are over 1,000 species, almost 1,200. So this would be quite daunting to scroll through one by one to try and find a match to our beetle. And indeed, if you scroll all the way down to this page, each of these species tabs only includes 500 species at once. So it actually forces you to try and narrow things down. Otherwise, you won't be able to look at all the options to try and identify your species. So let's say that this is a very tricky one and I have no idea what it is. And I've spent a lot of time. Let's say I spent half an hour. I'm scrolling through all these photos. I haven't managed to find a match. You know, there are a few similar ones, but I'm still quite uncertain. What I can do is I can enlist the help of some experts. So here we go to the next tab over where it says identifiers. What this does is it shows you who all the top identifiers are of beetles in New South Wales. And straight away, we can see that there's one standout at the top. So this is Boris B. He has pretty much 5,000 identifications he's made out of all these observations. So pretty much a quarter of them. Now, that name won't mean much for people who don't use iNaturalist, but Boris is an absolute legend. He has over 360,000 identifications, pretty much all of beetles that he's made for other people on the site. So he is an absolute genius. You've also got a lot of other really great options here as well, although a number of these other identifiers kind of specialize in certain types of beetle. So for example, Vital Friends here, he's really great with longhorn beetles. SDJ Brown is great with weevils, and Malacoderm is really good with jewel beetles. But Boris pretty much can cover anything and everything. So what we're going to do is we're going to enlist his help. So what you want to do is if you want to try and get someone's help is just like any form of social media where you're tagging someone, you type in the @ symbol followed by their username, and then some kind of polite message, something along the lines of, what are your thoughts on this interesting beetle? And then you just click done here, and that will post a comment. And because you've tagged Boris, he will then get a notification. And when he opens that notification, He'll come to your observation and fingers crossed, he'll be able to identify it for you. So that pretty much covers iNaturalist in a nutshell. There are obviously 1,001 other different ways you can interact with the site and all kinds of tips and tricks I could spend hours going through with you. But that's pretty much the basic functionality of the site. You go out, you take photos of really cool bugs or spiders or any kind of invertebrate for the purposes of this course. You upload those through the iNaturalist interface, and then you can either use this Explore tab to browse through those organisms in the area that you took the photo of and try and find a match for your species. Or you can go to the Identifiers tab, figure out who some of the experts and top identifiers are, and then tag them in a comment. And hopefully they'll be able to help you or at least point you in the right direction. So for example, Boris might not know this species, but maybe he knows that this is in the Gallerusinae, for example, which is a type of subfamily of leaf beetle. So then you can say, okay, now that I have that information, I can type in Gallerusinae. And now I see instead of 1,200 species, I've only got 31 species I have to look through. So then I can say, okay, got a few similar options here, but straight away, these two kind of jump out at me. So I can right click on the observations and click open link in new tab, open link in new tab. I can look at this one and say, okay, this looks pretty similar to my beetle. But one thing you'll notice is that this black banding at the base of the elytra, so the elytra are the hardened forewings that most beetles have, it's completely joined. Whereas in my beetle, there's a gap in between. Whereas if I then check this species, I'll see there is a gap, and this pretty much looks spot on for my beetle. So I can say, okay, I'm fairly confident that I've managed to figure out what this is. I can type in the name, click the option, and away we go. Now we have identified our butterfly and we've identified our beetle. And it's as simple as that. And then even better, now that these things have been identified, your data then gets exported to those other databases and can be used in real life research. So hopefully you guys check out iNaturalist. It's an amazing site. Even if you aren't looking to identify things, just browsing some of the absolutely amazing photos and observations that other people have made from around the world is a heap of fun. So good luck. Hopefully you guys encounter some amazing invertebrates out there, whether it's in your local park or your backyard or in the local national park that you're able to get to. Make sure you check out iNaturalist. Good luck.